Hola, and welcome to today's lesson about the preterite and imperfect tenses in Spanish with Senorita Harders. Today's lesson is probably one of the most challenging for a native English speaker to learn, simply because we do not have two different past tenses in English. So let's go ahead and do a quick review. First of all, what are the two past tenses? In Spanish, we have the preterite tense. This was the first one that we learned about. And we also have the past tense, which is the second tense that we learned about. Do you remember the acronym that we used to help us remember the preterite tense? Great job. The way to remember the preterite tense is to remember a cap. Again, not a baseball cap. What does CAP stand for? Muy bien. CAP stands for a completed action in the past. If you would like to review the preterite tense, please be sure to check out the links to the preterite videos in the description. Okay, now let's talk about the imperfect tense, which is the other past tense in Spanish. Do you remember the acronym for the imperfect tense? DARTS. And you remember what DARTS stands for? D stands for description, A stands for action in progress, R stands for repeated action, so something that you did multiple times in the past and perhaps even still do today. T stands for time or age, and S stands for simultaneous actions. So if you did two different things at the same time. Today, we're going to learn a new acronym to help us understand the difference between the preterite and the imperfect tenses. That acronym is SIMBA cheated. SIMBA is the acronym that we need to remember for the preterite, and cheated is the acronym that we need to remember for the imperfect. Let's take a look at what each of these letters stands for. S stands for single action. Una vez yo fui a un barranco. What preterite keywords do you see in this sentence? Muy bien. Una vez means one time. So this is a single action that we did one time. One time I went to a ravine. We use the preterite tense of ir, which is fui, to say I went in the preterite tense. So S in Simba stands for single action, and I stands for interruption. De repente, escuché una estampida. What preterite keyword do you see in this sentence? Excelente. De repente is the preterite keyword that lets us know to use the preterite tense. What does de repente mean? De repente means suddenly. So, suddenly I heard a stampede. Anytime that you see de repente, we will know that some action is causing an interruption suddenly, and we will use the preterite tense. All right, let's look at the next letter, M. M stands for main event. We use the preterite tense when talking about a main event that happened in the past. Cuando estaba asustado, mi papá me salvó. When I was scared, my dad saved me. If you notice, we have another verb in the sentence too. Estaba, meaning I was. Is estaba conjugated in the preterite or the imperfect? C. The aba ending lets us know that this is the imperfect tense. When I was scared, my father saved me. Notice that we can have both the preterite and the imperfect in the same sentence. But the main event in this sentence is when Mufasa saved little Simba from the stampede. Okay, now let's take a look at the B in Simba. B stands for beginning action. Any beginning action that started will use the preterite tense. Empezó a subir el monte, pero se cayó. He started to climb the cliff, but he fell. The verb empezar, meaning to start, needs to be conjugated in the preterite tense. Empezó. He started. Notice we have another verb in this sentence too. Se cayó. Is this verb in the preterite or the imperfect tense? Muy bien. Se cayó, meaning he fell, is in the preterite tense. But why? What are the two reasons that we conjugate se cayó in the preterite tense? Excelente. Se cayó, meaning he fell, was a single action. He only fell once, not multiple times. And it was also the main event in the story of The Lion King. Okay, now let's take a look at our last preterite letter, A. A stands for arrival or departure. Anytime that someone is arriving or departing, we will use the preterite tense. Mi papá se murió y yo me fui. My father died and I left. We have two departures in this sentence. Simba's father, Mufasa, departed this life and arrived in the next one. And Simba departed from his father's side and escaped into the wilderness. Okay, we have now learned all of the uses of the preterite tense with our Simba acronym. Now, let's take a look at the imperfect tense using the CHEATED acronym. As I said before, our acronym for the imperfect tense is CHEATED. What does the C stand for? C stands for characteristics. For example, yo era atrevido y travieso. I was daring and mischievous. We use the imperfect form of ser, era, in order to say I was in the imperfect tense, because we're talking about characteristics that describe Simba. Let's look at the next letter, H. H stands for health and habits. We use the imperfect tense when talking about health and habits in the past. For example, de niño jugaba con mi amiga Nala todos los días. In this sentence, we actually see two different imperfect keywords. Can you spot them? Muy bien. De niño and todos los días. De niño means as a child. When you see the phrase de niño or de niña, you'll probably be using the imperfect tense if you're talking about something that you used to do habitually as a child. Our other imperfect keyword phrase is todos los días. Todos los días means every day. Something that you do every day is a habit. So that is why we will use the imperfect tense. Okay, we have C for characteristics and H for health and habits. E stands for emotions. Anytime that you're talking about emotions, we will use the imperfect tense. Estaba asustado cuando llegó la estampida. I was afraid when the stampede arrived. Oh, look, we have another verb in this sentence. Llegó. Is llegó conjugated in the preterite or the imperfect tense? Muy bien. Llegó is in the preterite tense. Now, can you tell me why llegar is conjugated in the preterite tense based on our Simba acronym? Excelente. Llegar means to arrive, and arrivals are the A in Simba, letting us know that we need to use the preterite tense. Okay, now let's take a look at the letter A for the imperfect tense. A for the imperfect tense is age. Tenía 8 meses cuando mi papá se murió. I was 8 months old when my dad died. We use the imperfect conjugation tenía because we're talking about Simba's age. But look, we have another verb in this sentence too. Se murió. Is se murió conjugated in the preterite or the imperfect tense? Muy bien. Se murió is the preterite tense. What are 3 reasons why we use the preterite tense to talk about when someone died? S, single action. Death is a single action. It only happens once. M, main event. When Mufasa died, that was a main event that happened in the story The Lion King. And A, arrival or departure. When someone dies, they depart from this life and enter the next. Okay, now back to the imperfect tense. The T in cheated stands for time. We use the imperfect tense to talk about time. Era mediodía y hacía mucho calor en el desierto. It was noon and it was very hot in the desert. We're almost done with the imperfect tense. E is for endless activities. An endless activity is an activity that you started in the past and continue doing that activity over and over and over again. And perhaps you still continue doing this activity to this day. For example, cantábamos siempre con Timón y Pumba. Do you see any imperfect keywords? Siempre. Siempre means always. Something you always did and perhaps still do is an endless activity that we need to use the imperfect tense for. We always sang with Timon and Pumbaa. Great job! We finally made it to our last use for the imperfect tense. The D in cheated stands for date. We use the imperfect tense when talking about the date. Era el 24 de junio 1994 cuando mi película se estrenó. It was June 24th, 1994 when my movie released. Since we're talking about a date, we use the imperfect tense. But if you notice, we have another verb in this sentence too. Se estrenó. Is this verb in the preterite or the imperfect tense? Preterite. Great job. Why did we conjugate this verb in the preterite tense? What are 2 reasons from our Simba acronym to say why our movie was released in the preterite tense? When a movie was released, that is a single action and a main event. So we need to use the preterite. All right, so to summarize, these are the differences between the preterite and the imperfect tenses. And before I give you a chance to practice, I want to share with you one more trick to be able to help you tell the difference between the preterite and the imperfect tenses. In Spanish, we have 2 past tenses, but in English, even though we only have 1 past tense, we usually have 3 different ways to talk about the past. For example, I worked, I used to work, and I was working. I worked and other verbs that would typically end in ed are almost always the preterite tense. When you want to say I used to work or I was working, that is almost always the imperfect tense. So you worked, trabajaste is the preterite tense. You used to work or you were working, we use trabajabas, the imperfect tense. We use the preterite to say he or she worked, trabajó, and the imperfect tense to say he used to work, or he was working. Trabajaba. We use the preterite to say we worked. Trabajamos. And the imperfect tense to say we used to work or we were working. Trabajábamos. We use the preterite tense to say they worked. Trabajaron. And the imperfect to say they used to work or they were working. Trabajaban. Okay, practiquemos. Remember, one way to tell which tense to use will be to look for the preterite and imperfect keywords. If you remember from our video about preterite verbs, you'll know these are the preterite keywords and the imperfect keywords that will help you be able to tell the difference between the preterite and imperfect. Another way to tell whether to use the preterite or the imperfect is to look for the meaning of the sentence and to use our acronym Simba cheated to figure out if you will use the preterite or the imperfect. Okay, let's give it a try. Mi papá blank 7 años cuando se murió. Will we use the preterite tuvo or the imperfect tenía to complete this sentence? Imperfect. Great job. Why do we use the imperfect in this sentence? Because we're talking about age. My dad was 7 years old when he died. Una vez blank unos insectos con timón. Will we use the preterite comí or the imperfect comía to complete this sentence? Preterite. Una vez comí unos insectos con timón. Why do we use the preterite tense in this sentence? Muy bien. It was a single action. I did it one time. Una vez. Did you notice those preterite keywords in our sentence? Okay, let's take a look at another example. Todos los días yo blank con los leones. Will we use the preterite or the imperfect? We will use the imperfect, cazaba. I hunted or I used to hunt. What key words let you know to use the imperfect tense? Todos los días. Muy bien. Every day I hunted with the lions. Now, using our acronym CHEATED, what are 2 reasons why we use the imperfect in this example? Habits. It was something that Simba did every day. And endless activity. It's an activity that he still probably does today. He is still probably hunting with the lions. So we use the imperfect. All right, let's take a look at our next example. Mi tío Scar blank a mi papá. We will use the preterite or the imperfect in this example. We use the preterite tense. Mi tío Scar mató a mi papá. My uncle Scar killed my dad. What are 2 reasons why we will use the preterite tense from our Simba acronym? Muy bien. Scar killing Simba's dad was a single action and a main event in the story. Siempre Nala y yo blank en el desierto. Will we use the preterite or the imperfect tense in this example? Muy bien. We will use the imperfect tense. How did you know? What key word let you know to use the imperfect tense? Siempre. Siempre means always. What are two reasons from our cheated acronym that let us know to use the imperfect tense in this example? Habits and endless activities. Muy bien. Let's take a look at another example. Muchas veces, blank, mientras Zazu, blank. In this example, we have two different verbs. Will we use the preterite or the imperfect tense to fill in the first blank? Imperfect. Muchas veces corría. Many times I ran. Which letter from our acronym best describes the reason why we use the imperfect in this sentence? H. H for habits, because this is something that I did many times, so it was a habit. Muchas veces yo corría mientras Zazu blank. Many times I ran while Zazu blank. Will we use the preterite or the imperfect to fill in this blank? We will use the imperfect again. I was running while Zazu was flying. This is a simultaneous action, which isn't exactly in our cheated acronym, but it was in the S for our DARTS acronym that we learned about earlier. So we will need to use the imperfect to talk about two actions that are happening in the past simultaneously or at the same time. Okay, and one more practice example. De repente, Timon y Pumbaa blank. Will we conjugate this in the preterite or the imperfect? Great job. We will need to use the preterite tense. How did you know? What key words let you know to use the preterite tense? De repente. Remember, de repente means suddenly. Also, which two letters from our SIMBA acronym let us know to use the preterite tense in this example? Yes, I for interruption. De repente is a key word to let us know that some action is interrupting another. And we also will use A for arrivals because Timon and Pumbaa arrived. If you would like to have an easy way to remember the preterite and the imperfect tenses, be sure to download these free resources from my Teachers Pay Teachers store. The link is below in the description. How did you do telling the difference between preterite and imperfect verbs? If you still find this topic to be challenging, don't worry. As I mentioned before, this is one of the most difficult parts of learning Spanish, at least it was for me. But with practice, it will get easier and easier, I promise. I hope that this video about the preterite and imperfect verbs was helpful for you. Please like and subscribe to learn more Spanish with Señorita Harders. Adios.